Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 22nd School Board Workshop. Tonight we have two items on the agenda, and the first one is a presentation from our attorney, Bruce Smith, who has been the school board's attorney for several years, many years. I'm not sure the exact number. But Bruce has worked with us in all manners, from negotiations to student-related issues to everything that we need an attorney's advice and counsel for. Bruce has been great. So we are very happy and thankful that Bruce is making time for us tonight to clarify some, I think, misunderstandings on school, what purview the school board has, what purview the town council has in particular, so that we can, as we move forward and hoping to rework some of our budget process, we're all clear on what roles we all have. So I'm going to hand it over to Bruce, and then I'm sure you'll give the board some time for questions.
There he goes.
So not right now.
We've got some extra.
Oh, okay. I was trying to be the.
Oh,
Bruce, can we actually have two?
did you hand out your
We
your
gave ours
copy?
away, trying to be nice.
All set?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, I'm sorry, Bruce, just to interrupt you, normally we'll do public comments at the beginning, but since we are in a limited, I know you have another engagement tonight, since we're on a limited time span, we're going to save public comment until afterwards.
Okay. I have a chart prepared that I can't see, so I suspect that you folks can't see it either, so just as a courtesy
Should we bring it closer?
to everybody, I have copies here.
This is what-
And
oh.
I think there are enough copies for everybody. May 25, so this is what's on that chart up here. And I've had some questions about what, legally speaking, the role of the school board is and vis-a-vis the town. And as I understand, what I've been asked to do is just sort of review that from a legal perspective. And I've been practicing school and local government law for over 30 years. And in my experience, this issue is this issue of school board role, council role, and so forth has been an area where there's been a lot of confusion. And I know there's been an issue that was brought to the council about the school board. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't really know the inside out of that. I'm really just going to try to sort of give a basic sort of civics primer, as I understand it, about the legal roles of the school administrative unit in the municipality. And I brought this chart, and again, I know folks probably can't see it, but you can follow along with the copy I gave you. And what this basically is a flow chart that graphically represents, some of you may have seen the opinion letter I wrote, but basically it's the same principles that are laid out here. For me, I find it helpful to represent things this way. This is the way I think, and so I thought that some of you might find that helpful as well. It's like GPS works okay, but I like to see a map and know where I am on the map. That's kind of old-fashioned, I know, but it helps me. So this is sort of a hierarchy, starting with the state legislature at the top, and we could even go sort of further up that chain to the federal government. As you all know, we have a United States Constitution that sets forth the powers of the federal government, and we remember from our history or social studies classes that the federal government is a government of enumerated powers. It only has the powers that the Constitution grants to it. Now, there's been a lot of litigation at the Supreme Court over the years about how extensive those powers are, and it turns out they're quite extensive, but they still are limited. And what the Constitution also says is that those powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states. So that's really a federal constitutional acknowledgement that the states basically have everything that the federal government doesn't have, and some of it overlaps as well. So, and then we look at each state to see how they've set up their governance. Basically, they're all pretty similar, but we also tend to have the tripartite government of the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive branch. So there's also, of course, the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, which puts a lot of limits on where state legislation can go. For example, you can't pass a state law that says that restricts the freedom of speech. You can't pass a state law that restricts freedom of religion. You can't pass a state law that takes away due process. So there are all those limitations as well. But basically, once all what's left belongs to the state legislature, and the state legislature has the so-called police power, and that's a term that judges and lawyers use, and it's a little misleading because it's not about law enforcement. Basically, it's the power to regulate human behavior very broadly, not just in terms of criminal law, but general government functions like whether it's environmental standards, locally zoning, all those things, behaviors in other ways, limits on use of property and noise ordinances. You can go on and on, but so the police power generally, if you look at the right side, well, from my side it's the right, from you it's the left side of this chart, is sort of the general government functions. And the legislature, again, is sort of the font of all authority in the state, and the legislature has given the general police power or general government oversight to municipal corporations or municipalities. Cape Elizabeth is a municipal corporation, as are most of the municipalities in the state. And but it's treated education differently as a particular state function. And the court cases say over and over again that education in the state of Maine is a state function, and it's governed by the state legislature, and it's to be done in accordance with and provided in accordance with state law. So basically the way this chart works, as I hope you can tell, is that it sort of looks at the functions of education and the general governmental powers as sort of parallel. And so we have at the top here general government power and the education as separate and parallel functions. And then going down the municipal government side, you have you have state law passed by the legislature that says that the basically local government is subject to the many state laws you also have to comply with, a matter of home rule or local governmental control, and you exercise that through your charter. And charter municipalities like Cape Elizabeth will have a charter that sets out the roles and responsibilities of the municipal government and the basic structure of the municipal government. As you know, many municipalities don't have charters. A lot of them, particularly the smaller ones, have traditional town meeting forms of government. So in a town meeting town, the voters are really the legislative body for all purposes, but there is usually a board of select persons who are the municipal officers, but their functions are very limited. But if you're sort of building from scratch up, traditionally towns in Maine were town meeting towns, and more towns, especially as they grew bigger, adopted chartered council forms of government, and that's what we have here. So you've got the charter that sets forth how municipal government works, and the entity that's involved is the municipal corporation, the town. On the education side, there's not an exact parallel, because education being a state function, we have a whole state Department of Education which oversees education in the school administrative units. So the legal entity that provides education to the students of Cape Elizabeth is the school administrative unit. Again, sort of parallel to the municipal corporation. But we have in between, unlike on the municipal side, we have a state agency that's looking over what you do, that's writing all types of regulations like learning results, curriculum standards, safety rules, requirements for policies, bullying, anti-discrimination requirements. We have this agency here, and this agency does have the authority to supervise public education by the school boards and to inspect schools. So if there is a concern, I mean, the commissioner can, on his own, come in and inspect a school if he wants to. And inspect doesn't just mean to determine whether the wiring is up to code, but obviously to determine whether the school is being run in accordance with the requirements of state law. And that can happen also when there's a complaint or a petition filed with the department. So there's this important oversight function that the State Department of Education has to oversee the work in school administrative units and school boards. So in part this goes to the question of, well, to whom is the school board accountable? And in Maine, the school board's accountable to the voters, just as the town council is accountable to the voters. It's the same voters that elect both bodies. But the school board is also accountable to the Department of Education. And the commissioner and the department have the authority to enforce all the education laws. I have a book that collects all the education laws that's over 450 pages long. So there's a lot there, and it's a challenge to follow it all, but it's a very detailed system of regulation that, again, is overseen by the Department of Education and the Commissioner. So just going down the line with schools, so the state law provides that school administrative units will be governed by elected school boards. That's how the legislature has decided to provide education to Maine citizens. They don't have to do it that way. There's nothing in the Constitution that requires they do it that way. They could have decided to do it in a different way. You heard about recently there was a proposal by the governor that there be a statewide collective bargaining agreement. I mean, it could even go further than that. Now, that didn't pass, but it could happen. And some of you may know that in the South, particularly in the South, education is organized on a county basis, not on a local municipal basis. So the legislature could, I don't suspect it will, but it could say that that's the way that education will be furnished. But right now, it's furnished by school administrative units governed by school boards. The school board is required to employ a superintendent of schools. The school board, generally speaking, is the policy-making body, but it also has specific roles and responsibilities to make specific decisions, including hiring of the superintendent, including approval of hiring of all principals, approval of hiring of all teachers, managing the schools, school construction projects, preparing a budget is a very important function, and some of the functions that school boards have are listed here. They're just by way of examples, what I would consider some of the more important functions. And I think I've basically covered those. So those are done by the school board. On the council, again, has authority over town government. The council, under your charter system, is a town manager form. Now, you don't have to do it that way. That's the way the voters of the town of Cape Elizabeth have voted. The charter is adopted by the voters and can be amended by the voters, but the voters are the ultimate authority. just as they are with respect to election of the school board. So you have a town manager who's been given a lot of sort of what I would call chief executive functions under the charter to manage the municipal affairs, and you have a lot of different general governmental functions. The functions for the municipal government are quite broad, and can range into a whole bunch of areas as long as they're not prohibited by statute or prohibited by the Constitution or already covered by statute. Now, in the case of education, education by statute has been delegated to school administrative units and school boards. So when we talk about municipal school units, we're talking about two different entities for the municipal corporation that serve different functions. The school administrative unit provides the educational function, and the council governs the general municipal affairs, which are quite broad. And they both serve the citizens of Cape Elizabeth, and they both ask for financial support from the citizens of Cape Elizabeth through taxation. Now, a very important role of, and this is a statutory role, of the school board and the council is with respect to budgets. Just to get into that a little bit more specifically, and I have to give you a little background to help to understand this. You may remember when the school consolidation law was passed back in, I think it was 2007, when Baldacci was governor, and very controversial law, but at the time that law was passed, a very sort of detailed school budget adoption process was passed as part of that. And what that law did was to create this system of regional school units, and the hope was that most, if not all, smaller units like municipal school units would merge into these regional school units. Well, so that certainly didn't occur in any great degree in Cumberland County or the Portland area. It did occur to some degree in other parts of the state, and a lot of those RSUs have broken up because this, you know, the urge for local control is very powerful in the state of Maine. So without going too far afield on that, there was this budget law, school budget law that was passed, and almost, you know, as part of that law, I mean, it was really written for regional school units, which are multiple town school units. But the legislature also said that municipal school units have to follow the same law. And in some ways, that's sort of an ill-fitting suit of clothes, because it was really written for regional school units, which are somewhat different. But in any event, that's the law we have, and that's the law that municipal school units have to follow. And what the law says about municipal school units is that in charter municipalities, the budget meeting required by the school budget law must be a meeting of the municipal council or other municipal legislative body. So here in Cape Elizabeth, you have a municipal council. So the school budget meeting is held by the council. Well, what then is the school budget meeting? That is addressed specifically in statute. I don't know what I do with my glasses, but I can read this without them. I think they're in there. Those are my keys. Anyway, the school budget law has this budget validation referendum process, and you're familiar with it because you have to follow it here. But in an RSU, the way it would work is that it requires that the school board prepare a budget. And then it requires that the the school board have a budget meeting in the RSU. Who attends that meeting? Basically all RSU voters. It's kind of like a town meeting on an RSU basis. And the law says that 7 days before that budget meeting, the school board has to furnish a copy of the budget with the underlying information to the voters, make it available to them, and post a warrant that the meeting is going to be held. And then the meeting's held, and then the law further says that at the budget meeting, the superintendent is to thoroughly explain the budget. So if we take that into the municipal context, it's really the same requirement. A budget has to be presented to the council in this case, which is functioning as a legislative body for the town, similar to or analogous to the voters in an RSU. And that budget is presented and at a budget meeting of the council, and the superintendent, presumably with involvement of school board members, thoroughly explains the budget. And counselors can ask questions about it and get more information about it. And then the first step in the budget approval process, well, the first step is the school board approval of the budget. The second step is council approval of the bottom line of the budget. The council's authority is to approve a budget amount, a total budget amount. The council can't change the amounts that are within the budget, but the council, if it doesn't like the budget for whatever reason, can decline to approve it, or can approve a lesser amount or a greater amount, a different amount. The council has that authority. And once that is done, as you know, then the budget has to go out to the voters in a budget validation referendum. And that's a full referendum, and the voters are asked to basically say yes or no to the budget that was approved by the council at the council budget meeting. That's the process.
So that means I asked you once, and I think you said part of what happens prior to the bottom line being set is up for interpretation. Is that true? So specifically, I think in the hopes, the school board's hope of, changing our process in the future, of hoping to be able to have conversations with town council prior to our vote, prior to them reaching their bottom line. Is that prohibited or not prohibited, or is that subject to interpretation?
Well, by the way, the charter does say that, have one provision saying that the school budget must be provided to the town manager 75 days before the end of the fiscal year, which I think would make it mid-April. That's the charter provision on that. There isn't anything else in the charter or the state law that says what kind of interaction there should be between the school board and the council prior to adoption of the budget. Different towns do it in different ways. Portland actually has a process whereby they sort of present a budget they have discussions with the finance committee of the city and try to get some feedback on what the city's hoping to do in terms of final budget. And as you may have read, they've had some disagreements this year about that. But they went through their process, and there can be a communication process beforehand. But I mean, in terms of the legality of the situation, the only thing that's mandated is that you prepare a budget and that you submit it to the budget meeting and that you thoroughly explain it. But outside of that, there's nothing to prevent the bodies from voluntarily communicating on whatever schedule that you can agree upon to communicate, to try to promote understanding. I mean, presumably the school board is going to be advocating for passage of its budget, because you went through and you adopted it, and you would like to see it passed. And in order to do that effectively, you probably want to be able to make your case to the council, which is the ultimate authority. Now, again, I think that both parties have to agree on how they're going to do that. I don't think there's a strict, any limitation that says they can't. So if you wanted to have a session, whatever your deadline is, say it's April 15th for submission of your budget to the town manager, if both boards agree, or a finance committee, it could be a smaller working group, that's the way they do it in Portland, could sit down and have discussions and interaction. Here's our situation this year, the school board might say, and the council or its representatives might say, well, we have other needs that we have to meet, so we have to consider all these things. So you should know that as you work on it. But again, I think to make it work well, it depends on, I think, mutual willingness to engage in that communication and interaction. As push comes to shove, the law doesn't prescribe that you do any particular thing. John?
So there is one provision in our town charter that has come up, and it has to do with a limitation of the town council with respect to directing individual spending items rather than the total budget. But it strikes me that is far different than preventing conversation and input. If they would direct us, we would not be bound by any such direction. They can only still set the total budget. As long as I think we're clear on that, it seems that there's a pretty wide open field for discussion. And so can you talk about how that prohibition might work, particularly in case where the school board is actively seeking input, which is a very different thing?
Well, I agree, absolutely. It's as a matter of state law and as a matter of charter, and this is the same in all charter municipalities, that generally speaking, the council can't tell you how to spend inside your budget. And in my experience, the conversations usually look at the big picture, the total, rather than asking for feedback. Well, should you hire more teachers for the elementary school or for the high school? Those kinds of decisions clearly are the role of the school board. But so the communications, I think, generally focus on, well, here's what we're looking at for potential tax impact. Here's what we need to spend. We do have needs we have to meet because of an enrollment increase or some other situation, or most notably a subsidy change. And that's swinging all the time, as you know, and often in the wrong direction for you folks. And those kinds of discussions are entirely, I think, appropriate. And then to hear from the council about, well, we have very important needs too, and we're calling on the same base of taxpayers to fund all these needs, so we have to have a balance, and we're going to ask you, school board, to take that into account as you prepare your bottom line budget. I think it's perfectly appropriate to have those discussions.
So, a perfect, for example, this year, given the tight, limited subsidy we were getting, and with a significant list of things that we need for the district, had we been able, assuming we were able to discuss, for example, financing a feasibility study, and if we were given indication early on that, know that the price, the effect on tax increases is too much, I'm just putting it out there, like, tell me if this is not allowed, any of this. But had we been given any kind of feedback, perhaps we would have said, all right, so the feasibility study is not in the picture, so let's then put another item, and that is smaller. For example, finishing the Pond Cove playground. Would that kind of exchange, be within okay?
I think it's allowable, it's permissible, but it's not mandated. I mean, in fairness to the prerogatives of both bodies, that has to be a voluntary engagement. The council can't decide the inside of your budget.
Right.
And the council might say to you, well, we don't really want to discuss that. Come to us with a total and justify it, and we'll decide whether to approve it. So again, I think these types of discussions depend upon the voluntary engagement of both bodies to say, we think this would be mutually beneficial.
Mhm. Okay, so it is subject to, you know, opinion in a way, so as long as both parties agree that it is beneficial, then there's nothing stopping us from doing it, is that right?
I would agree with that, yes. Elizabeth?
So on the flip side, though, to what degree should the council direct the school board to cut particular line items?
Well, they don't have any authority to do so. They have authority to reduce or increase your budget, or approve what you propose. They can express opinions, but those opinions are not in any way binding.
Let me see if I
Just
can-
as any voter can express an opinion.
Let me see if I can summarize what you're saying. The council's job is to set the total budget.
Yeah,
And they will receive our input, but they will make the decision.
right,
And we will receive that total budget number.
Yeah.
And we will define it how we want. We may take their input, or we may not, same as the council. So it's within that number, we have the authority to do what we decide is best.
Exactly.
And we will consider their input and other inputs as we desire. And similarly, when they set their total budget number, they will take into consideration our inputs and other inputs as they so desire. Is that accurate?
exactly. I think that's entirely accurate.
And there's no limitations on that level or types of inputs that may be requested or provided.
I
As
don't
long
see-
as those authority lines are clear.
I think that's clear cut. I think there may be situations where overreaching could occur in either direction, but, and I don't know where exactly that line is crossed, but holding the budget hostage to a particular type of cut, I think could be problematic. So and that's a fuzzier line to draw.
So I think, were we to go down a road like that, it would be probably important or worthwhile to have language that reminds people of those responsibilities and authorities and inputs and what is binding upon them and what is not.
Yeah.
And what their authority is and what is not as they engage in those discussions. But it's certainly not a limitation on exchange.
Right. I mean, anyone can, any individual can express an opinion on any part of your budget. This line item is ridiculous, this line item makes sense, but whether, again, it's up to the school board to decide how to divide that money. And I don't think, speaking as a legal concept, the council has the same standing as the citizens in that regard. They can express an opinion, but it's ultimately your decision. But again, they do have ultimate authority to approve the budget, so you're in a position, just as you would at a voter budget meeting, like in an RSU, to explain why it's important for them to approve that budget.
There's a slightly separate circumstance insofar as we may explicitly solicit their input, or we may not do that to the same level, or with the same specificity that we might the general public. Public is certainly welcome to comment at all the public meetings, but it is a slightly different status of exchange that we're contemplating.
Yeah, I think you could solicit, and again, it's up to them whether to
Sure.
engage.
So Bruce, just slightly, changing the direction a little bit, and not going into the specifics of, the letter that the town council received in April, but just to be clear, because I think there is some confusion out there amongst citizens, community members, that, and you've laid it out, but I just want to clarify that if a citizen has issues with the way, school boards, superintendents is making decisions or managing, they can go to the town council if they want to, but the town council does not have oversight of the school board.
Absolutely
that-
not.
okay.
The concerns about how the schools are managed locally should go to the school board or the superintendent and should follow your complaint policy. And again, if somebody says they lack confidence in the school board, well, you have the same remedy that if someone lacks confidence in the council. It's the same group of voters that are electing the body, and they can express their views of the ballot box. Now, that may not be provide instant gratification, but that's democracy. Just as we may have dissatisfaction with some of our elected officials in Washington, we don't really get to have our say on that until the next election. So that's the system we're dealing with. And so if a school matter should come to the school board, a municipal matter should come to the council. So if it's just if, you know, if somebody comes to the school board and says, well, it's unsafe out on Route 77 here in front of the high school, and I want you to put police officers out there to direct traffic. Well, you have to refer them to the council or the police department or the town manager, because you don't have any control over what happens out on that public road. It's not within your jurisdiction.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. I think in my mind, that's clear. I think the flow chart makes it that much more visually understandable. I don't know if any other school board members have any other questions for Bruce. No. Yeah, so this might be a good time if the public wants to voice any particular questions or comments. Please feel free to come to the podium.
I didn't raise my hand right away, but I have a very germane example from the fall when I was chair at the time. There is an ongoing dispute in town over paper streets in a certain part of town, and the school board was approached by a group about the paper streets, asking that the school board would advocate their position. And I called the chair of the town council, shared that we had received this communication, shared the communication with the town council, and told that person that the school board has nothing to do with this. You should refer your comments to town council. So,
You know, that's another example. And I think if you were to take that up, I think could create confusion.
yeah.
And you couldn't do anything about it. You have no control over the paper streets.
No.
And I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think the goal, as much as, you know, I think personally it helps to collaborate and communicate. You want to not blur the lines so that it creates confusion, in my mind. I think, you know, making it clear, you know, what is under our purview and what's under the town council purview, the clearer we make that, I think the more clear it becomes for the entire community. And I think, you know, that example is a good one of how to handle it. So, would anybody from the audience like to ask a question? Or Sarah, you want to come on up? Or
I just want to, it's not a question, it's more just a statement to say that I don't think it's so bleak as saying, well, you just have to wait till the next election, because that feels like a long time for citizens. There's many, many ways to influence both boards. You can get your friends to email, you can get people to show up and speak. If someone more than just who's interested in your complaint, there's lots of ways to make the board pay attention to you, and people do it, I know, with both the school board and the council all the time. I mean, you can write a letter to the editor if you really want to get a lot of attention. So I would say to citizens, you don't have to wait a year, 2 years, whatever, but if you're the only one with the complaint, that might make you sit up and take notice that you're alone in your complaint. If a lot of people are also concerned, well, that impacts a board a lot. I mean, I know when the council gets more than one email on a subject, we try to have a conversation with it, or we try to address it with the citizens, and I know you guys do the same thing. So that's just a way of saying, don't reach a level of frustration where you turn to the other board, which we've determined here is ineffective and illegal. Rather, get yourself heard. Go see the town manager, go see the superintendent, come to a meeting, wave your arms. The boards will pay attention to you. We're elected, that's our job. So I just wanted to
Well,
make
that's a
that
good point. Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, Tim Thompson, 6 Pine Ridge Road. I haven't really learned an awful lot tonight, because I think this has been a pretty well talked out subject over the years. What the school board can do, what the town council can do. And I think if we went back and looked at our charter, we'd find it was probably pretty carefully crafted so that the town council didn't get involved earlier than they should. And that the budget was put together by you guys and presented to them. I think the town's lawyer very carefully crafted his opinion that that's the way, if we want to change that, we need to change our charter. But the charter pretty specifically spells out that you guys build the budget and you present it 75 days before they need it to the town manager. And if we want to change that process in town, we ought to probably have that conversation. But that's pretty clearly what it's laid out. And as John summarized, I think it's pretty clearly also that, you know, they can't get involved in telling you where to spend the money, but their job is to say, okay, you presented this, and we either support it or we don't, and what they do support goes on to the voters. I think that's pretty clear. The part as far as the letter from the citizen that ended up going to the town council, and I don't think the town council, from anything I've seen, have demanded a meeting with the school board. I think they've requested a meeting. They'd like to get together and talk about this. I've said this before at your meetings and at the town council meetings. I do think we need to figure that, we do need to kind of clear the air on this, and we do need to have transparency as one of the drivers in town. And I think if we don't clarify that for the voters before the June 12th and the voters in town go out and either vote for or against the school board budget, I think it's gonna have an impact. I also said, I think it's gonna be a challenge to get this budget approved at the amount. It's the biggest budget increase, even with the reduction, taking the planning out of it. It still is the biggest budget we've put together in about a decade from an increase standpoint. So it's still gonna be a challenge, and we don't wanna have any more obstacles out there than are necessary. And not having transparency, and at least getting together and discussing in a voluntary kind of a way back and forth. If we want to promote this one town where, let's get together early on and discuss it, but then later on say, well, that's none of your business, I think that leads the town in a divisive kind of a position, and I don't think it's very helpful for our town. I think we need to work on bringing us together, and we need to work on transparency. Thank you.
I'm Tom Dunham at 11 Becky's Cove Lane, and I thought, Tim, what you said is right on. And there needs to be much better discussions and openness between the council and the school. And I don't think it has been there. Thank you.
Hope?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
What I'm hearing is, I'm hearing sort of a lingering sense of there needs to be a discussion, and there's sort of the idea that maybe this should happen by a certain date. And I think, based on our presentation we heard tonight, that maybe there is room for us to have collaboration and have earlier discussions with the town council. And I think that all makes sense and it sounds good, but what I want to understand from the citizens who are looking for that transparency and that sort of, this meeting to happen, my question is, what is the goal of that? Like, when I work in my profession as I do a lot of mediation and negotiation. I try to look at both sides, and the first thing you do is you say, what are your goals? What is the goal? I'd like to know, what is the goal of having that meeting, and what exactly would come out of that in terms of how would we demonstrate greater transparency in a meeting that happens between now and June 12th? How would we address, specifically, how do we do that? How does the school board address those concerns that, in a way that we haven't already done so? So I'd like to hear ideas on that. So how do we do that? And what are the goals?
I'd like
Because
to-
I feel like it's a moving target, and it's really sort of being presented there as, we haven't done that, we haven't made our effort to be transparent, but specifically, what more can we say?
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to say something, then let Bruce go first.
Well, I think it needs to be, and kind of the point I was trying to make in explaining the structure here is that, and I think Ms. Lennon made the point as well, there is opportunity for airing concerns about the school board and management, and that opportunity is before the school board. And that's where people should be directed, just as if there's a concern about how municipal affairs are run, that should be aired in front of the council. It's not, I think it is inconsistent with the law and the way that this is all set up for the council to be airing and hearing complaints about the school board. And so there is there is full opportunity for people to bring before the board, in accordance with its complaints policy, any concerns about how the board is doing its business, and to demand some kind of public response. There's also an opportunity to go to the Department of Education if people feel that the school board is not doing its job. What I think is structurally inconsistent with the law is to have the council undertaking school issues when those are exclusively the prerogative of the school administrative unit and the school board.
And also, Hope, to your point, I think, asking what is the goal, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Because as far as I'm concerned, I hear Tom, I hear Tim saying transparency, transparency. The only thing that would be different is, from what I understand, is you're asking for us to have a meeting with town council. But all the information has already been put out there, has already been made available via email, via public meeting. We've had,
On the website?
on the website. There's no more to transpire. I mean, everything's out there. The only thing that has not happened, according to what one citizen has asked, is for a joint meeting. There's no other new information out there. And as far as transparency goes, I've said this before, I wish executive sessions could be in the public, it would leave a lot of people, more clear, but I just want to confirm that there's nothing more to say that we could possibly say that we haven't already said, or already addressed, or already written about, or emailed about.
We've had a public meeting
And
with an agenda.
And we've had a public meeting where we opened up the floor to everybody, and nobody chose to ask us any questions. So
Or
I,
email us any questions.
or email us any questions. So I'm confused about the request for transparency, because there's nothing more to put out there. Everything is out on the table.
And I would just add that the issue where we do perhaps share some oversight with town council was around the audit, and we have met several times with town council and had a public meeting, had our auditor at the last meeting. So on that point as well, I think we continue to welcome, if anyone has questions, send emails. We'd be happy to hear more questions, but I think at this point, we're just unclear what else we're trying to answer.
I wanted to, because you have to leave, before Bruce leaves, I wanted to change the subject a little bit, if that's okay, and just ask for some clarification. Because I keep hearing that the town is responsible for the final number that we approve, that we present to them as a budget number, and they can either say we want it higher or lower, but they're not responsible for line items and all of that. And, you know, I personally find it a little bit fuzzy, because they want to understand the budget in order to know what they're approving, so they get in the weeds a little bit, trying to understand the ins and outs of it. And my question is, with this idea of they can't be specific into line items, is when they approve the budget and they decide not to approve the number that we have presented them, and they give us a number that is exactly the same number as a big cut. For example, the budget number that was given to us was the cost of the feasibility study. So I think you said that they have the right to have their opinions and everything, but the fact that the number that they gave us is so I'm just looking for clarification. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but there was also, there were comments being made that they'd really be upset if other things were taken out. So, do you see what I'm saying? When it's so, can somebody help me out here if
I
I'm not
understand
being
your
clear?
question.
It's so exact that it feels like it's about an item number,
Well,
and that's frustrating to me.
That's not unprecedented.
normal?
I've seen it happen in other places where, say at a voters' budget meeting, somebody's upset that, well, a kindergarten teacher's being cut. So lo and behold, the exact amount of money to pay one more kindergarten teacher is added to the budget. Well, the budget meeting can't tell the board to hire a kindergarten teacher. The board now has more money, and they can decide how to spend it how they want, but they may decide, well, to follow the sentiment that they've heard. But that's voluntary, it's not legally required. Similarly with a cut, sometimes a cut equals exactly what a particular line in the budget, and a message is being sent. It's not legally binding, but you have, it's up to you what to do with that message. And part of the thinking is, this is not just law, it's politics, it's getting along, it's you're all volunteers trying to do a service to your town, and how to make it work well. And I think when you get messages, you have to listen to them, but it's not legally binding. And I know that's not a perfect answer, but that's it. And now, when it comes to that, I understand that it was for architect's fees or something, or design fees.
Facility
A facility study.
to see what's
I
going
mean,
on with
it's-
the building.
The school board does have responsibility for construction, design, building and all that stuff. So it's your decision whether to do that, regardless of what the amount of the budget was cut. But if you don't have money to do it, you won't do it. Or if you feel like there's not support for that idea because the council has expressed that, even though it's not legally binding on you, you can take that into account as well. But the building, the basic construct for a building project follows this same structure. It's a school administrative unit function, and whether it's a renovation or a repair or a new building, the school board is the initiator. Now, if money has to be borrowed or raised, that goes to the council and ultimately to the voters.
Well, I appreciate that. That clarifies some things for me in the sense that I just thought it was interesting that the number was exactly that number, and I guess that's common, so thank you for.
Well, it happens. I don't know
Yeah.
how common it is, but it certainly has happened.
Thanks.
Could you, I think you just touched upon it, but, so there's a comment put out at the last meeting about maybe doing, kind of looking at all the town buildings. So how does the school, maybe by town council or maybe by us collectively, I don't know, but how do the schools fall is that something that could be under the town council? I mean, I see here custody care repair of school buildings, but they're also town buildings.
Well, this is an area of, I mean, the buildings are managed by the school board. The school buildings are. And, you know, I know you have some shared buildings, or I think you do, and you can divide that up. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and it makes sense to, since schools are multi-use buildings that do serve other community functions, to look at it in the greater context. But it has to be done sort of through negotiation between equal partners, the town and the school board. Understanding that you are responsible for school buildings and you can't abdicate that authority. The law doesn't permit you to do that.
Thank you.
Is that it? Okay, Bruce, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for coming tonight and answering questions on the fly and,
Do you want this?
sure,
Especially for you.
sure, thank you.
What about
Actually,
the
Bruce,
fireplace?
do you have, is there maybe a PDF version of that? Because I think it might be useful to post on the town website or
Use
something.
this. Oh,
Yeah,
I can,
have somebody send
we
that
can have
out.
it emailed over to Howard.
That'd be useful, I
Okay.
think it would be useful. Because as much as Mr. Thompson, I appreciate you saying that it's, I think there's still a lot of confusion in town, so I think it's useful.
Yeah,
That's a good
and
point.
I'd also like to clarify, Mr. Thompson, the discussion that we've had here tonight and the clarity that was here tonight has not necessarily been nearly as clear through much of the conversation throughout earlier in the year.
Yeah. So just for the public to know, for the agenda tonight, we're halfway through. The second part is, we're just going to talk about how we are going to manage the $249,000 reduction in the budget. And then we will adjourn. Then the school board's going to remain, just so you know, and we're going to have an executive session and then a special business meeting following that. So we're almost done here with the filming part. So in going in order now, the cut without Howard here, it's a little awkward, but he'll come back. So I'm pretty sure that we're all thinking the same thing, which is the reduction of $249,000 for the feasibility study amount is what we will end up cutting. Because there's no fat in the budget to trim anything so that we can include it, unfortunately. Is this how we're all thinking, or any comments?
I'm not necessarily there.
You're not, okay.
Because I do think we want to stop and step back and really, again, go back and consider the priorities. And I think that the challenges we've discussed several times is, what is the cost of waiting?
Mhm.
And the cost of waiting is really, really high.
Mhm.
We've had some recent, I think, budget news from the state and some other things that have been favorable, so the hurdle may not be quite as high as that. And if you ask me, in some respects, I would think about delaying more capital projects that are currently on the schedule for next year and doing the study. And knowing that what we're really addressing that is longer-term capital project needs that really need to get done. And committing to a process where we go through, we get the buy-in, and we make the changes. And waiting is really costly. And I say this now because I look back, not just one year, I look back at the last several years, and I feel like we've had, we're overdue for this discussion. Our budget increases on a budget-to-budget basis have not really kept pace. And as Chris Strauss sort of mentioned, our teacher and salary percentage is high, and that's partly because everything else is so low. So we've really trimmed it down to a really thin, and what's gotten pushed off are long-term important things like the study. So I think it's worth at least having a discussion on is, can we do it?
So Howard, I'm going
Just
to
in time.
fill you in as you're walking over here. We've brought up the next and final item on the agenda, which is the reduction of $249,000
Right.
for the budget. And
Right.
I'm sort of doing a straw poll of the school board to see if there's agreement that that means we eliminate the feasibility study. And
Right.
so far, John has raised doubt on his end, feeling, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but feeling that perhaps there are capital improvement projects that are within the budget that could be traded.
So basically, I'll summarize quickly for you. For several years, we've had very small budget increases because we've had very big state cuts, and we've put off really important things till later. And this stuff is really, really important, and we have an opportunity now to really push it forward. And if you push off other capital projects, those are some of the ones that will eventually get lined up into what we really do right. And so that's at least something I thought was worth discussing before we just say, yeah, do the easy thing and cross out the study. Because that look at our facilities is really important, and we've been ignoring it for a long time. And it seems, there's always a question of how do you make the important stuff urgent? And this always never seems urgent, and I think it is now.
I don't love you using the word ignoring, just so you know. I don't feel comfortable with the word ignoring. Unable to address? Yes.
It
Hasn't
also,
risen to the actual priorities.
it also seems unfortunate that I think there was sort of this bundling of projects, and there's some projects that are so urgent that you say that really are harming the kids. I think the Pond Cove Cafetorium being one of them, that we have kids who probably haven't eaten a healthy lunch in 6 years because there wasn't time to sit down and actually eat what's in their lunchbox. I have a child who it's too late for her, but I'd hate to see us continue to do that. And it's unfortunate that, and I'd also like to get that $50,000 in supplies back for Pond Cove that we cut out trying to make this all
Yes.
work. So I feel like, there was this big picture around the facilities, and it became a target, and now we sort of, the overall budget is not what we would have wanted it to be, and perhaps there's other capital projects that we wanted to focus on and not have made those cuts, like the Pond Cove Playground. So I would like to say, what else could we do? I mean, besides just saying we're not gonna address that.
I mean, I don't have the binder in front of us, but what capital projects are in there that we could shave? I mean, I feel like there weren't
Well, I don't have
many.
the list memorized.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know that tomorrow morning I'm meeting early with a number of people about a facility correction that needs to be made, without getting into any detail about a student needs for next year. And this is a project that can't be put off. I could get the list for you and get it back to you quickly, and we could meet about it again if you wanted to. I know that Perry asked last week if he could go ahead and at least put out requests for bids and requests for proposals on a lot of those projects that are out there, because people that are contractors, they're lining up work right now where they did it in the winter. So if you don't get them locked in soon, they aren't available to you during the summer months. So he's not committed to anything right now, but he wanted to get those out there. So those have been posted. Or if they haven't been, they will be done in the very near future. I'd be surprised if they weren't already out there. I remember 2 years ago, there was $1 million in that budget. And last year, it was cut by in half to 500,000. And this year, in order to try and help bring that architectural fees into the budget, we cut it even more. So it isn't even.
What we need.
Oh, no, I mean, it's really just, cutting corners right now, so it's what's going on here with these facilities. And it's nothing new. Anybody thinks this is a new problem, or this is a new issue? No, that's not right at all. So, I don't know. I mean, I can, if you want me to try and go back and figure out a way that we could take a lion's share of the balance of that account and apply it toward the $249,000, I could do that, and I could do it quickly. I mean, we could meet real soon, and I could show you what amount of that money, what it would mean, what can't be put on hold, what can be and could possibly be done either next year or rolled into the project down the road. And then I could also show you what the delta is, and then what we could do to come up with that amount of money. I mean, that could be done.
How would I have the list?
Okay, but I see, I need to ask Perry.
I know, I'd be shocked if there is much that, I'd be shocked if there was much that we could put off.
Yeah.
I mean, there are implications that are not, so there may not be necessarily safety, but they might be, around morale, around, having thought your room was gonna be painted for the first time in 15 years or something like that. Thought you were finally going to have some windows that don't leak. I mean, we've got some safety things, we've got some, so I'm not against it,
So I
I'm
just
just
want to be
saying.
clear, it's like, I'm not wedded to a solution, but I just wanted, rather than we say, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is what we're gonna do, we really ought to have the discussion, because I still think it's a really important item.
I agree.
Yeah. What I would, what I have said, and I'll say it again if you don't mind hearing it, is just that I think it would be the wrong approach to somehow subtract that amount of money from other important projects, to trade one for the other right now. I think that would be, for morale, would be really hard. And it begs the question, if it wasn't that important, why was it in the budget in the first place? I mean, if all of a sudden now, that position,
Pull it out.
right? And so, do you want to set a meeting, and I'll meet with Perry, and we'll generate that list and show you, he can just circle the things that he feels, this cannot wait, whatever those are. And I think they have to fall on, I guess, on compliance to state and federal law, health and safety. I mean, those will be the tipping point.
So if what we're trying to do is have the discussion of keeping the feasibility study and finding $249,000 to fund that from our budget, that would be the entire CIP. And unless you believe that there's I don't think we'll be able to use the entire CIP for this. So
You won't.
we won't. So therefore, what's the point? Are we gonna go anyplace else? Is there any other place to look for it?
Well, what I think, what I don't know the answer, say that we have 250 and that 150 could be, one could argue that 150 of it could be postponed, right? Then we're looking for 100,000. Then if you want me to, I would try and figure out what could be done to capture that $100,000. I just think what I don't know is this gonna just irritate a whole lot of people that we don't wanna irritate? I mean, I just don't know.
Right.
I mean.
Well, and if we could have done without it, we would have done without it, is my opinion.
Exactly.
And I don't think we can do without it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the irritation thing is tricky too, because I think there's a large population of people who are irritated that it was in there, and a large population of people that are equally irritated that it is no longer in there, and
Yeah.
I don't know how any of that plays out on voting day.
Right, and you don't know if the irritation is over that project or over the tax increase.
Right.
Those are two different things.
Right, two different things. Yeah.
So I think we may have a little bit more in the recent favorable changes to some of the state things may allow us to take a little bit more, tiny bit more out of unassigned funds, because that's where it's eventually gonna roll to.
Right.
Little bits, there's little bits here and there. So I'm just, before we said, this is definitely what we're gonna do, I wanted to sort of stop and see really where we're at and
Would you like to meet next week?
Well, what I'm thinking is you're meeting with Perry tomorrow.
I'll try to meet with him tomorrow.
Oh, I thought you were, I'm sorry.
Well, I am about a student matter
Oh,
at the middle school.
Okay, so
Um,
let's say you're able to meet with him tomorrow about this.
Mhm.
You know, if you guys look at it and say there's just no way, then I don't know why we would meet. If you think there's, a chance and maybe we should consider it, then we should meet. But if you guys look at it and say, this is impossible, then we don't need to meet.
I'll talk to him.
What do you guys think about that?
I think we've reduced our CIP budget from 1 million to 250, and we're considering reducing it, so
Yeah, I don't.
I'm not okay.
I didn't, I mean, my comment was more just frustration and wanting to say, I think we really, there are things that need to be addressed, and I would like us to be able to find a way to address it. Unfortunately, I think the feasibility study is sort of an all or nothing number, and that's the issue, is that trying to do that feasibility study sort of has this connotation that it means we're going to spend 27 million next year, we'll go for a bond, which isn't necessarily
I
the
know.
case. So what I was hoping, what I'm suggesting or wishing for is that we had a way to say, how do we get to, how do we come back to the beginning and say, where, identify those priority items? Is there a way to get going on that, without spending 250 this year on a potentially $27 million set of projects?
So I'm
And-
sorry, Hope, are you saying reallocating some money to go towards something that wasn't on our wish list? Is that
I'm
what
not
you're saying,
making
or-
any particular suggestion,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's unfortunate, I think the number for the feasibility study was this number it's related to a potential $27 million set of expenditures, and I think that was what really made it unappealing and concerning. So if we had a way to say, well, we're just gonna work on the project that's going to address the safety issues, or we're just gonna work on projects, if there was a way to say, and I don't know if that's possible, and
Well,
haven't been part of any of those conversations yet, so I apologize if I'm,
Well,
throwing-
I know you all know this, but maybe not everybody does. That 27 million was always a hypothetical
I know.
dollar that people have
I know.
acted like it's a hard number. It's
Yeah.
never been a hard number.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I can talk also to the architects and ask them if we were to narrow the scope of this to the most obvious projects, almost anybody would agree is, what, that really needs to be done. Does that change anything about their number? And then if it was a different number, I could then try and work with that on whatever we could come up with. I mean, I could just try and I could just do some talking.
And
Yeah.
again, I know we're already bare bones, like I said, I want that 50,000 in supplies back, I don't know how they're going to write in the, you remember when we cut 250 out of the budget in
Oh,
order to make
I-
room for the feasibility study, and if we
Right.
weren't gonna have it,
I wish we had made
wish we had that money back.
You bet.
So I'm
Right
not
now,
saying
our
go any,
percentage is
we're
lower.
not going any deeper, it just, I'm expressing my frustration, and
Yeah, I had wondered the same thing, if we scale our scope way back, if there's any, I know they've cut the cost down a lot for us already, so, likely there may be nothing further that they could cut, but if it could be any smaller. And my other question, well, probably quite silly, fundraising, is this something that, it's, I think 250,000 is perhaps out of our reach right now, but is this anything that could be fundraised? CEF grant, I know they've already done their spring grant cycle, and this is far too big for them, but a portion of that, is any of that?
I don't think so.
Chalk it up, it's a silly question.
You don't think so?
It's
Why?
such a core
Just-
school function.
Hold on.
Well, well,
right, it shouldn't be a limited stand.
it's really thin ice for an architect to say, we'll we'll keep working with you on this project. And by the way, we're working for a fraction of what we had talked about earlier. I mean, literally a fraction. And you're gonna raise funds, so brownies and cupcakes to get us that far.
I premised it with
out
this,
on
it was a
the
silly
pond.
question.
And then
That
we're
was
gonna
a
try
good
and raise some,
question.
next year, we think we got even a better idea about selling, Christmas wrap. I mean,
Yeah.
It's
No.
just. it doesn't-
I totally agree. I
know,
don't
but that's
want
what I
to
mean. I
let
just
go
don't
of
think
this.
that's the security that they're
Yeah.
gonna need,
No, and-
that we're really all in.
Yeah, no,
So-
I totally see that. I think yesterday, we had buses going out to Lake Region. We had kids that ate lunch, brunch, we'd call it, at 10:40 in the morning. They did not have dinner. They played sports games out there, and they got back at 8:30 at night. There was another group of kids going out to Lake Region today. Like, when we talk about health and,
I know.
and that like doesn't even begin to address the safety issues we have with, just how incredibly accessible the fronts of our schools are. I mean, my daughter was just the other day, she's like, oh yeah, the UPS guy let me in. I was like, good, that works so well. So I just, if there's any way that,
Yeah.
it's a priority, I guess, and,
Well, I may call them in to meet with our building committee, and the two of you are on that building committee. But I'll talk to them before that, and see if there's, but I'll see what we can do.
I think it's a great question, Kimberly, and I appreciate it.
I didn't
and
mean to take a light, but I mean
Oh, no.
fundraising for.
No, and I needed to know the answer, because there's a part of me that says, yeah, well, fundraise.
Right.
But you're right, I mean, we know,
This isn't a
this is
trophy.
not an option right now,
Yeah.
and to explain it for those reasons, it helps, so
Right.
thank you, Kimberly. Elizabeth?
I think that there's been a fundamental misunderstanding out in the public about this study, and words and specificity are so important to me, and the idea, this isn't necessarily a feasibility study, it was a facilities study. We weren't looking for a feasibility means, is this able to happen? It was a study of our buildings, period, just a study. And so while I do support this idea of, we already know that there are some needs, can you go ahead with them? That means we are giving up what we don't know. We're giving up the big, huge monster that could be lurking in the corner that we don't know about. And so there will not be a true facilities study. There won't be the looking and, there are some things we already know about. There are these potential disasters around the corner that we aren't going to know about. And what I would really like to remind the public is that the facility study has to come before any project. So the idea that any train has left the station, any project has been put together is just fantasy, because there can be no project without a study first.
Right.
And so, while I am in agreement that we have some really high priorities, and we could, and I think it would be great to ask them, can we narrow the scope to, entrances and water over electrical wires and internet wires? And, the cafetorium, which is a nightmare, and I've walked through, I don't just hear about it from my child who eats at 10:40, and my diabetic son who can't eat lunch in the cafetorium because lunch is too short to go to the nurse's office, test your blood, get your insulin, and then go to lunch. It's over. But if we do that, I hope we still can hang on to the idea that there are things that we don't know about, and that we still are going, we're gonna spend this money and need the study.
Maybe I respond. So the infamous $27 million includes, as you remember, $4 million for work that needs to be done, that most people would agree needs to be done if they only knew what the problem existed. That's still, if you don't do the real deep analysis of these three buildings right now, you're gonna regret it, and people are gonna say, why were you so short-sighted that you didn't really look under the hood? That's just irresponsible. So I think that you have to do that, and that has to be part of this project, so you can say it to the voters that you have gone through this with a lot of professionals. Do you realize that nothing's really happened here other than a couple of tours with people? That's all we've had. We canceled meetings at all 3 schools with our faculty and staff, with architects, because of the outcome of the meeting the other night. I mean, even that's off. So it's just, I mean, getting back to the train stopped. And there's a lot to look at besides the obvious things that we all know and agree on. These things have to be fixed. And not everything, we all get it, that not everything that was on that earlier list falls into the same category of this is a high level of importance. There's no confusion about that. Those are ideas that were floated initially. That happens. And you do that with a home design. So,
I know, you
I'll
always, you don't
talk
always
to-
get the jacuzzi.
right, you're not gonna get the jacuzzi, or you will, but no water. We can't have water. So I'll talk to Perry tomorrow. I'll talk to the architects. I mean, invite them in to meet with the building committee. And if we think there's any reason to bring you back together, I'll talk to you and we'll see about it. Do you want to set a tentative date for next week while you're here, all here?
Tuesdays are generally a good bet, so, just earmark
Just see
the
my calendar.
29th, but,
Yeah, I think I'm okay, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but,
So could we hold that 29th tentatively?
yeah, sure. But, again, if, only if there's a
I
reasonable
will just
meet.
reassert my opinion that it's likely you would have to look outside of CIP.
Right.
And this board member is not okay with that, and this board member is not okay with reducing CIP to 0 either.
Right.
No,
So-
and this board member is not either. I think the question now is, if we reduce our scope, will the feasibility cost, whatever, go lower? Can we go under that to address these very specific targeted? Now,
Yeah.
not saying we're discarding for the future, all the other stuff we want to look at, but just as a
Step.
as a question.
Sorry, I
Right.
feel strong.
We gotta
No,
figure
that's
out
great.
what the number is, a rough number. I need to get input from the faculty through their principals. I need to hear from the principals. I mean, there may be some ideas people have that, there are always ideas people have that are good that I don't think of. So we'll look at it. Okay.
May I
Thanks, Howard.
may I ask a procedural question? So we determined our budget and it had that number in it. Do we need to fix the allocations by a certain date? Or, I mean, were we planning on doing that tonight? And by pushing this off, are we causing an issue?
Are we causing
No.
an issue by delaying? Are we
An
causing
issue
an,
with
As far as voting goes?
Yeah.
Oh, no, they're voting on a number.
Sure, but, right, so my point is whether we reallocate something to address this is something that can happen over
Right.
the course of
Right.
time, and we don't need, there's no urgency to, okay, got it.
it's a good question. John?
Well, I think, sort of a more general comment on it, about the school budget and sort of and working with the town council and sort of the long-term planning. We're sitting here and we're talking about this feasibility study. We haven't had any significant new construction in this building, I think, since 1992, when they built the kindergarten wing. I think that's what it was. That's 25 years or so, or more. It's a long time. Now, and more than that, I think that we haven't even thought about it. And when I think about where we are and what we've been doing and the way the state aid has been going, we really sort of have to think of this in a long-term viewpoint. And as a community and a school, really have a view as to, in the long haul, what does it take to fund the type of school district we want? How do we respond when state cuts come? We should have an idea. We shouldn't be surprised. They will come, they'll go up and they'll go down, but we shouldn't be surprised by that. And we, both the school and the town, should have a view. And similarly, and knowing that the long-run rate at which we're gonna likely need to support these schools is this. And it's not based on what did we spend last year, how big a tax increase is it or not this year. That's the wrong conversation. It's gotta be a much longer-term view about what we can and what we should afford. Because when we had more money from the state, we didn't invest it in the schools. We banked it and went back to the taxpayers. It's not a long-term thinking.
It's not a long-term view. So I don't know what the number is. I don't know what the right number is, but we need a long-term view about what it takes for this community to support the school district financially over the long haul and not react every time it's this little tax increase and that little tax increase.
So the comment that John made right at the beginning, that it's been almost 25 years since we've thought about construction projects, and the comment about the train hasn't left the station and all of that, I just want to give a shout out and a thank you to Howard for getting this ball rolling. Even though there's a really, really great shot that this feasibility or facility study will not happen, it's out there now, and it is going to happen soon. I wish so much that it was happening this year for so many reasons, and it's mostly for the students and for their experience, and for their safety, God help us. But I just want to say thank you for having the foresight, Howard, to say we need to do this, and we need to look at this, and we can't be, what's the word, not ignoring, what were you saying? Not able to delay it
Yeah.
any longer, like this has to be urgent. So, you know, I do think we went a couple miles on the train, and I hope we get to go a lot
Actually leave the
further.
station.
It's crazy, crazy important. Otherwise, I mean, it's gonna be nothing here for the kids to study in.
Right.
So,
And for the teachers to teach it.
and for the teachers to teach in, absolutely. So, anyway, I just want to say thank you
My
for your
pleasure.
willingness to really get that going and make this all get to where we are now.
Thank you. Okay, I'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thanks.
I didn't mean to diminish your idea.
Oh, no, I know, I mean,
Okay.
it's real, it's true. I'm just sad at the thought of a delay and hopefully a delay for a year is all that we look at.
Okay, let's try. We'll work at it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So I guess we're closing our workshop for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Jack. We're gonna just